about it. Now, May is Mental Health Awareness Month. Today, we're going to focus on narcissistic personality disorder, a mental health condition in which people have an unreasonably high sense of their own importance. Most of us have a narcissist in our lives. It could be us. So we had to bring on the woman who wrote the book on narcissism, actually several books. She's Dr. Ramani Durvasula, psychologist and professor at Cal State LA, and host of an immensely popular YouTube channel all about narcissism. Dr. Ramani, thanks so much for taking some time to speak with us about all this.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I think we've got everyone who's ever taken a selfie a little nervous about this conversation, but also curious. So let's start with, what is narcissism and how do you recognize a narcissist?
So narcissism is a personality style, and it's a personality style that's characterized by a person who has low levels or very variable empathy. They're entitled, grandiose, arrogant, egocentric, constantly needing validation and admiration, often need to be in control, are sort of often driven by power and dominance. But they're also very insecure. And the insecurity is likely the core of this structure, that all of these things like the entitlement and the grandiosity is a way to sort of offset all of that. But we often think of people who are narcissistic as people who are obsessed with looking in the mirror or taking selfies. Now, narcissistic people can certainly be superficial and vapid and vain, but that's almost like a second tier quality. It's that lack of empathy, that entitlement, and really almost an interpersonal meanness.
Right. Well, I can just imagine people at home saying, I think she's describing me. Wait, does me thinking that she's describing me make me a narcissist? So what do people who think that you're describing them, I mean, if you're a narcissist, what do you do about it? Is awareness itself almost like meaning that you're not one, or what?
What's interesting about it is that people who are genuinely narcissistic often don't have a lot of what we call good self-reflective capacity, which is a really fancy way of saying that they're not self-aware. Right. Exactly. So a person who doesn't have empathy, who thinks that they're forever a VIP, that they should get all the attention, that everything is about them, that is that chronically selfish, they are not self-monitoring. They really kind of delusionally believe their own hype. They have to, because they're so insecure. Remember, it's all about offsetting that insecurity. So if a person's scratching their head and saying, I'm a little worried that I might be narcissistic, to me that's a great sign, because that's somebody who's self-aware enough to say, this behavior may not be acceptable and maybe I need to do something about it. But the vast majority of people with this personality style actually think that they're not the ones with the problem, but you or I. Anyone else is the problem. So they'll shift blame and say, there's nothing wrong with me, but there's everything wrong for you. There's everything wrong with you, I should say. And so that's the problem, is that they don't think there's anything wrong, so they often don't go to therapy.
Right, it's that awareness, and I know you talk a lot about mindfulness, and we'll get to that in a second, but as people are saying, okay, maybe it's not me who's a narcissist, but they're sitting on the couch next to their partner, their parent, their spouse, and they're saying, I actually think you're talking about my spouse here. So what about the people who have a narcissist in their life? How do you broach the topic? What are the practices that you can suggest to those people?
This is really difficult, right? Because when you have a narcissistic person in your life, it's probably already done a fair amount of harm to you. It's not healthy to be in a relationship with a person who doesn't have empathy for you, who blames you for things, who doesn't take responsibility for themselves, who is manipulative or who may be very dismissive. In the long term, that's not good for anybody. But to have that recognition, I can tell you one thing. If I only say one thing to anyone watching this tonight, the one thing you should not do is turn to them and say, hey, just saw something on the news and I think you're narcissistic. That will always backfire. I think that if you genuinely feel that you have someone narcissistic in your life and you believe it's taking a toll on you, therapy is often a really important first step, because people who have been through relationships, and I'm not just talking again about someone who's a little selfish and taking lots of selfies and obsessed with social media. I'm talking about relationships where manipulation and gaslighting and just somebody who doesn't ever notice you or take notice of you and who chronically invalidates you, over time that takes a psychological toll. And whether this is your partner, your parent, you're a sibling, a boss, this is harming you. And oftentimes therapy can be a safe space to unpack that and further understand it, so you have some tools to know what to do. It's not that simple. For a lot of folks, they can't leave these relationships. So it becomes the fine art of figuring out how to disengage and not get into the mud and not fall for the gaslighting. It's a process.
Right. Well, you brought up tools, you brought up therapy, so, that was one of my questions for you. I mean, what can we do? And you are such a resource, too, this YouTube channel that you have to check out. You really speak about how to speak to people about it, how to recognize it, all the things we're talking about tonight. Just in our last few seconds, I mean, one of the 4 pillars here is empathy. Is teaching empathy even possible? Can we treat this?
I think absolutely teaching empathy is very possible, but the younger you start, the better. I mean, the most important thing above multiplication and state capitals we could ever teach a child is empathy. Not only how to be aware of how, how other people are doing, but to be self-aware. Can that happen at any stage of life? Yes.
It's so true. We got to start young and model that behavior. Thank you so much, Dr. Ramani Durvasula. Make sure you check out that YouTube page. Really appreciate it. We do have more coming up and more resources on our website. Stay with us.